let's get class kicked off here. Happy Monday to you all. A reminder that grades as of Friday were up to date in Canvas. So your grade may have gone on a little bit of a roller coaster ride. We are just a couple weeks away from the next stipend payment. So I encourage you all to check your grade in Canvas. If you have any questions, if you are panicking about anything, you are welcome to reach out to me one-on-one or Slack. You are also welcome to reach out to Jason. On Friday, Jason, Caitlin, and I will be meeting and reviewing all of you guys, your academic performance, making sure everything's on track, and then reaching out to you about academic warning if we think your grade is kind of concerning. So you do have until Friday to boost that grade up. I will say that getting New York Times in and submitted and fully operational is the quickest way to boost your grade. But if you do check out Canvas, there will be a list of any assignments that are due. Again, I will get all the assignments graded before we meet again on Friday. And that is going to be the best way to avoid academic warning. If you are panicking about your grades, Friday would be a good date to try and get everything in. There's never a penalty on late assignments, but we're over that halfway point now in the program, so we try and make sure that anyone who we notice is struggling a little bit, we try and come up with a plan for you guys to catch up at that point. So check your grades in Canvas. Let me know if you have any questions about your grades, or go ahead and submit assignments. And like I said, before we meet on Friday, I will do another round of grading and boost your grade back up based off of any submissions or resubmissions that you get it. Any questions on assignments, on grades, on any of that good stuff? All right. So you thought you were done with Owen Wilson. Owen Wilson is coming back. We are getting a little bit more wowie tonight. This time we are going to be reacting to some wows. So we're going to get more practice setting up a React project again from scratch. We're going to compare the WoW code that we did in vanilla JavaScript to how we would pull that off using React. We're going to see state again tonight. We're going to visit the render method, and we are going to also see something called a use effect, which will be the second state component that we see tonight. I'm thinking that that will only take the first half of class, and then from there we may get into the weather data and seeing different components and how we approach all of that. So more hands-on React experience. You will see that we started out with a to-do list, which is a pretty small project. WoW is also pretty small. Weather will be the first time that we see multiple components. And what we will be doing is building our way all the way up, excuse me, to multi-page React projects. We will work our way up to the blog. We'll see how all of that data is flowing. And then before you know it, we will be done with React and really diving into databases, building our own APIs, full stack, all of that good stuff. I unfortunately will not be in class on Thursday. That does not mean that you have off. Nathan will be coming back in as a guest instructor. He will be covering TypeScript for you guys. So TypeScript is certainly not a requirement for your capstone, but our entire industry, not just in JavaScript, but really industry-wide, has really seen TypeScript start to grow in popularity. TypeScript is an evolution of JavaScript, so it is also backwards compatible. So whatever you write in JavaScript will also run in TypeScript. But Nathan's going to come in, show you some of the pros and cons on it. TypeScript is a very divisive thing. Either people really love it and think everyone should stop writing JavaScript and people should only write TypeScript, or people go, TypeScript brings a lot of complexities into getting it working. We don't think the benefits are worth it. We're going to just stick with JavaScript. So this is the first cohort that I have finally been pushed over the line. I'm not a true believer yet. I wouldn't say that I've drunk the Kool-Aid of TypeScript, but I do think that it is pervasive enough in our industry that we want to at least expose you guys to it. So you've got an idea. If you ever interviewed at a company and they asked you about TypeScript, you could say, "Oh, I don't really write it, but I understand. Here are the X, Y, and Z benefits of all of it." So again, Nathan will be in on class Thursday, and we'll be giving you guys kind of an overview taste of TypeScript. That 30-second feedback form will be super, super important. So I encourage you guys to provide feedback on that because, again, this will be the first cohort that we're going over TypeScript. So whatever your gut reaction is at the end of the night, whether that's this is cool, but I wish we didn't spend an entire class on it, whether that's, oh my God, I wish we only learned TypeScript, this makes so much more sense to me. However you're feeling about it, encourage you guys to provide feedback before the end of class on Thursday or at the end of class on Thursday. I don't believe there are any assignments coming up this week. So again, make sure you are focusing in on getting caught up on your assignments. There may be a couple question quiz that I may push to a Monday due date instead of having it due on Sunday. Again, so you have a chance to catch up on your assignments. And you know who you are if you are behind. But if you don't, check Canvas. Joe.
I might have missed it when you were talking about it, but TypeScript is an evolution of JavaScript. Does that mean that it works or is, I guess, compatible with the React framework, or do they not really mesh together that well?
They do mesh together well. There is a version of JSX called TSX, which is if JS or if TypeScript is an evolution of JavaScript, then JSX is an evolution of sorry, TSX is an evolution of JSX. So you can use them in React. It's not one for one, right? It's not, but the TSX and JSX work pretty interchangeably. I don't know if Nathan will be touching on TypeScript in React specifically, but the principles that you'll see in using it in TypeScript and JavaScript will be pretty easy to apply that kind of syntax into React TypeScript.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. Any other questions about where we're headed before we dive into some code tonight? All right. Again, I am on the road tonight. So if suddenly you cannot hear me or my internet craps out or anything like that, feel free to let me know. I do have a microphone hanging off the side of my headphones that the background blurs out, which is nice, but unfortunately it doesn't give me any kind of warning if it disconnects. So feel free to scream bloody murder if you cannot hear me. With all of that said, we are going to get a project set up for Owen Wilson. So we are going to rebuild our WoW website, but we're going to see some principles in React of how we go about doing that. So I'm going to pop open my terminal. I hit Command Space, type in TER and hit Enter. That should pop open our terminal. And the first thing that I always do in the terminal, I get disoriented, right? And I don't know where I am. And I'm like, okay, that's the most important thing when we are in the terminal. Whenever we are running a command, we are in a working directory. In other words, we happen to be in a folder. Now, your terminal may dump you out in your home folder. It may dump you out in the last folder that we were in. So I'm going to type in PWD, and it's going to tell me that I'm in my week 13 in my code. That's super handy because I want to go up one level. So I'm going to type in CD, and if I type in for change directory and I do period and hit enter, it takes me into my code folder. Now, what if you say, well, Max, I'm not in my code folder, or I happen to be in my home folder. How do I get around? How do I get to the my code? Well, you can always do a PWD to figure out where you are. You may be in your home folder and need to CD down into your desktop, or there's a really handy shortcut. If you type in CD and hit space, don't forget the space, you can then pop open Finder, navigate to where you want in your My Code. I'm going to do this and set up my week 14 folder. So I'm going to create a new folder called week 14. And then I am going to drag that entire folder into my terminal, and you will see it will auto-complete that path for me. So that's really handy. I can hit the enter button on that, and to confirm for the last final time I'm in the right spot, I can PWD one more time and see that I am now in my week 14 folder. With all of that said, we are going to npx create react app, and I am going to call this D1 wow, just in case we end up with a couple projects from tonight. So I'm going to call it D1 wow. I will paste that command in the chat. And React's going to take a hot minute. We're going to let that go. While it's doing that, we can get fired up in our VS Code. I'm going to pop open my week 14. I'm going to grab my D1 wow. I'm going to drag that into my VS Code. I'm going to paste the live share link in the chat. And then finally, I'm going to switch back to my terminal. Make sure that you have a happy hacking here. We want to wait until this is fully done installing. So if you don't have a happy hacking, let that install finish out. Once you do have a happy hacking, you can go ahead and quit out of the terminal. In my VS Code, I am now going to switch over to open an integrated terminal. My terminal will pop open down at the bottom, and all I'm going to do is run npm start. If you get a bunch of yellow text, that is okay. We should have the spinning React logo in our browser, and if you do, you're all caught up and good to go. Give you guys a minute to catch up on that. I know that this is only our second React project, so if you need any steps repeated, totally fine. Just let me know. Everyone good? Anyone need a minute? Anyone panicking at this point? Okay. So, what is our goal here? Well, if we take a look, I'm going to pop open the Owen Wilson code from last week. I believe that was week 13, day 1. Yes. I'm also going to pop that open just so I can reference it. And let's just do a quick review of how all of this is working, right? So we have this empty div that's called movie info. We pull in our script.js, and what does our script.js do? It comes in here and it goes, all right, this function is called make an API call. It runs because we call it down here. And it says, all right, go out and fetch the data from the Owen Wilson API. Parse out that JSON, extract out the information that we want, and then we have to do all of this work to update the document object model. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just make the API call, set it into the variable, and have the variable do all of the work for us? So that's what we're going to do in our React code. I'm going to come over. I'm going to pop open the src folder. I'm going to go into my app.js, and I'm going to go ahead and clear out everything in my app.js. While I am at it, I don't want this app.css getting in my way. So I'm also going to come in here, delete out my app.css, save that, and now I'm good to go in my app.js. In my browser, we have this white page. Okay, so how did this work last time? What we want to do is we want to have this variable called movie data. And whenever we have data that the user is going to see or interact with or type into, we use a special variable called state in React. So what we're going to do, whenever we use state, we get two variables back from it. We get the movie data itself, and we also get a function called set movie data. Because whenever we are using state, we can't update the movie data itself. We have to call this set function in order to change that in there. Safi, what's up?
Hi, yes, I'm actually getting an error when
Okay.
after npm start. I'll share my screen.
Go for it. Is it a port number issue? Oh,
Too sure.
okay. So the problem is you are in the week 14 folder. You are not in your day 1 folder. So
Oh,
this is a really common error to get. All you need to do is type in cd space
I didn't create one, so that was my.
no, create React app created it for you.
Mm.
So if you just cd into the D1 dash wow, and if yep, and hit enter. Now if you run npm run start, it should fire right up. And I'm glad you shared that because that's a really easy mistake to make. Either you can pop open the D1 wow folder in VS Code and it will do the right thing in the terminal, or you can just go down to that level in the directory in the terminal and fire it up that way. So I'm glad you shared that.
Thank you.
Of course. Anyone else need help? Okay. So we've got our movie data and our set movie data. We are going to wire that up. So we are going to use state, and you'll notice this autocomplete pops up. If we trust the autocomplete and hit enter, you will see that it dropped this import in here for me. Again, anything that starts with the word use is a hook. In other words, we're hooking into something in React that is already provided for us. And we are going to start that out as null. We then are going to come in and use another hook that this is the first time we're seeing it, and it's called use effect. Use effect takes a function as its first parameter and an array of dependencies as its second parameter. Kind of interesting. Use effect is basically saying, hey, when this data is affected, go do this thing. So in other words, if we put a variable inside this empty array, the use effect would go, oh, this variable has been affected. Go do this function again. Kind of weird, though, because we don't have anything in that array. So what is this use effect? Why do we need it? Well, it turns out that whenever a state variable updates, the browser does something called re-rendering. In other words, it goes back into this return function and figures out what has changed from the first render to the second render. That can be problematic, though, because we don't want the API call to happen every single time this page loads. We don't want to have that API call happen every time the data gets updated. Instead, we only want that API call to happen when the page first loads. So by using the use effect and making sure you again have this empty array as the second parameter of the use effect, we are telling React only do this thing when the page first loads. Okay, what do we want to do inside of that? We want it to make the API call. Okay, well, how does it make the API call? We got to tell it that. So we're going to say const make API call is going to equal a function. And then we can actually borrow some of that code. So I'm going to head back over to my WoW code, and I'm just going to borrow this right here. Pause there, give you guys a second to catch up. The use state, again, where we're going to store this information so it magically shows up when we update it. We have our use effect, which is a new hook that we're seeing for the first time. Don't forget your empty array as a second parameter. The use effect is going to say when this page first loads, go do this function called make API call. Make API call is a function that we declared right here up at the top. And then we borrowed this res data and console log data all from the existing vanilla JavaScript project we've already done. See some heads moving. There are a couple errors in the terminal. We have not reached a testing point yet. We'll resolve them in a second. We are 2 lines away from being able to test all of this, so we will finish it up. I used the await keyword right here. I don't like .thens. I prefer to do awaits. The only thing with await is I'm not allowed to do an await unless I make the parent function asynchronous. So right up here, I have to add the word async. You will notice that VS Code now gets rid of my red squigglies, and I'm making progress there. So I come over to my browser. I pop open my console, and we should see some data in the console. You do have to expand out the array. Once you expand the array, you should see some movie data in there. If you do not see movie data and you think your code is correct, now is the time to ask for help. Joe asked a good question. Just as an aside, why does JavaScript not automatically change a function to asynchronous if you call await? It's because there can be a domino effect of when you are writing a complex function. That function gets so complicated that you break it up into other functions, and those functions can get so complicated that you break those up into other functions, right? And so in a lot of more complicated code, we'll have something called a stack trace, and all it's is showing, and you've seen stack traces before, even if you didn't know the name of it, but it's basically saying we started out calling this function, and this function called this function, and then this function called this function, and it broke all the way down here. But in order to understand that it broke all the way down here, sometimes it's helpful to be able to trace through what called that line, right? Well, what you may be expecting is, hey, this function all the way down here at the bottom is just going to return a value. And then you go, oh, just kidding. I need an API call in there, or I need to do a database query, which will also be asynchronous. So you throw the async keyword in there. Well, now all of a sudden that function is now returning a promise. It's not returning just the value. So now you have to follow it all the way up the stack trace to make sure that you have everything async and awaited that is using that child function that you have now made asynchronous. So it isn't as easy as just throwing async in the keyword and just assuming everything will be fine. We're not using any return in this function, so in this case, it wouldn't cause any problems. But you want to be careful making a function asynchronous if it is returning a value, because then every place you call the function, you also need to give it a heads up. Hey, a promise is coming back from this instead of the value that you're actually looking for.
So it would change, just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, it would change the whole stack all the way up for everything that was called would then become
Correct.
asynchronous too. So everything would wait to just lost the word, to complete, to execute until that they got a return from.
Correct. So yeah, let's just say for whatever reason, don't follow me on this, just an example. We do like an add function and we say it's now asynchronous and we return num1 plus num2 and say num1 and num2. And then we console log out here add 1 and 5. We get in our console now a promise. And I'm like, well, I don't want the promise, right? I need to await the add being done. And now I get my number out. So by adding the async keyword here, you're basically promisifying the call of a function. And when we do that, we also need to add the await keyword whenever we call the function. So you don't want to accidentally make a function return a promise without dealing with the repercussions of everywhere in the stack that would call that same function. One of those that like coding it out just makes a lot more sense than explaining it, kind of thing. Okay, put this code back. Does anyone not have their data showing up in the console? Okay, so we get our data here, and all we need to do is set all of this data into our movie data state. So what we're going to do is we call our set movie data, and we are going to set the movie data based off of the data at index 0. Because remember, this API returns all of this data in an array. Just in case down the road, if we ask for multiple movies, they can now provide that to us. We're only pulling one random movie now. They still give it to us in an array, though. So we need to bust that data out of the array. So now that we've got set movie data comes in here. It updates movie data itself. And so because we have access to the movie data, it tells me I should also have access to the movie. So I'm going to come down into my return. I'm going to add an H1 for my movie. And I'm going to go to my movie data and pull out the movie name. I save, I refresh, and now I've got an error when I refresh. It says cannot read properties of null reading movie. Does anyone have an idea why that might be the case?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
If we refresh our page, now that we've got the movie data movie in an H1, it is now giving us an error that says cannot read properties of null reading movie. Anyone have a guess as to why that is?
Let's look at the use state too.
It is.
Nothing's
It is.
changed.
Elaborate on that.
I just had it.
You're on the right track.
We haven't updated anything yet. I'm sorry. I lost it. Sorry.
Kind of. So let's actually refresh your page show. You should get the error after you refresh. So let's kind of take a break here because I mean, not dinner break. I mean, let's break and trace through our code, right? Because oftentimes we do that at the end of the project, but we kind of need to understand this in the order that React is thinking about this, not in the order that we wrote the code. And it's really important to be able to do both, right? So we start at the very top. The imports kind of make sense. Pull in this CSS file. There's nothing in there. We can ignore it. All right, down the road, we're going to use this effect and we're going to use state, pull those in from React so that when we do use them, you know where they are coming from. Now make this function called app. That is our component. So let's start numbering this out. 1, import 2 hooks, state and effect from React. So JS knows where they come from. 2, make a component called app. You don't need to reuse this component anywhere, but this is kind of like our index.html. Terry, what's up?
Yeah, I'm kind of confused with so you have set movie data with 0, but why don't we use the movie data instead of the set movie data?
Movie data is immutable. So we
Oh,
are
so it doesn't
allowed
change.
to we're allowed to read from it, but we're not allowed to write to it. So in order to be able to update it, we always have to use the set function. So hold that thought, and if you still have that question in like 3 minutes, let me know. Austin, it kind of doesn't know what movie, but it's going to click in a second. You're like 90% of the way there, so it will click in a second. So we make a component called app. Then we come in here and we say set up an empty variable in state that will eventually hold the API results. Now we come in and it says for define a function called make API call, but don't run it yet. Now we skip over this. We come down to number 5. Use effect runs either when the variables in the second parameter, second argument, are updated, or as in this case, when the page first loads, if the dependency array is empty. So again, why do we need this use effect? Because whenever our state updates, it is automatically going to go through and re-render this component. We don't want that API call happening every single time our page updates. We're going to get blocked by the API. That's not what we want. We only want that API call to happen once. So we put it all in a use effect. But what have we noticed about this make API call? It's a sneaky mofo. It's asynchronous. So that means that this is going to run in the background. So it goes through our use effect and goes, la-di-da-di-da, I'm going to make my API call in the background. So it then comes down to this return. And we say number 6 before the API call is done. Access the name of the movie from the movie data in state. Well, that's not right. We said go get the movie from movie data. We haven't called set movie data. We said don't run this yet. Well, it is kind of running, but this sucker's running in the background. So before the API call goes out and gets the data and updates it in state, we've reached down here to the movie and tried to access data about the movie that we don't have yet. So we can fix that. And here's why we want to do that. Here's why React intentionally gives us this level of control. When we are building out our own APIs or interacting with other people's APIs, sometimes we don't control how quickly that data is coming back. Oftentimes, we don't want to just show the user nothing, but we don't want to show the user, we don't want to show an error message to the user. So React actually handles this by allowing us to return something based off of a conditional. They allow us basically to put a loading message in until the data is ready. And when the data is ready, then it will show us that information. Here's how we do that. We say, if there is not movie data, if the movie data from state is still empty, if it's still null, return an H1 that says loading. So now, how does this flow update? Let's take this and say number 6, because make API call is async and running in the background, it hasn't set the state yet. So return a loading message in an H1. Now it returns loading. And we're like, all right, everything's hunky-dory here. It's loading. But make API call here is now running in the background. So we come back up to here and we say number 7, make a API call function is running in background because it's async from number 5. This make API call is now running in the background. So what do? We 8 fetch the data, 9 parse the JSON, 10 extract the data from the array from number 9, and set it into state from number 3. Now here's where it kind of gets interesting. We trickle all of this down, we get the data out, we set it into movie data, and now all of a sudden set movie data comes up here and it goes, oh God, state has changed. We need to update all of this. So what do we do here? Movie data has now changed, but state is special. It understands that that data is state is just the variables that change that have the user data that we are going to show. It comes down here and it goes, make API call, I ignore you. You're just a function, you're not getting called. So it says, now we come down into this use effect and it goes, well, I'm not going to make the API call again because this is an empty array. This is not the first time the page has loaded. So I'm not going to make the API call again. Use effect is intelligent enough to say only do this either the first time the page loads if this array is empty, or if any of the variables in that dependency array have changed. That is now no longer the case. So we come down all the way to here, and it says if there's not movie data. But this time there is movie data. Why is there movie data? Because we set it here. So it comes all the way down to this return. It ignores this if statement. And now look at the H1. That H1 now shows in my browser. So let's capture that. Setting state triggers re-render. We come back up here to 11. State is retained across re-renders. Be careful, Terry, hitting that follow button because it makes my cursor jump around. It's so weird that I set it to read only, and somehow people still have the ability to control like what I'm looking at. It's so weird. It's definitely a glitch on their side. So 11, state is retained across re-renders, so nothing changes here. We come down here and we say 12. Function has not been called, so ignore this. 13. This is the second render of this component. So the use effect doesn't run because the array is empty. 14, ignore this loading message because there is now movie data. 15, return this div instead. That, and then we'll say 16, access the movie title from state and display it in an H1. Okay, so kind of complicated, right? And very much non-linear. When we look at this code, we go 1, 2, 3, that makes sense. 11, 4, 7, 12, 5, 13, 6, 14. That doesn't make any sense initially, right? But when you think about the flow of this, it is really important to understand what they call the component life cycle. Because when we write this code in React, we do have to handle, well, what's it look like if the data hasn't loaded yet, right? In JavaScript, we just had an empty div. And then we went back through and we updated that empty div. But what React allows us to do is now that that data is in state, we don't need to go back through and generate an H1. We don't need to put our video in there. We don't need to handle all of that. We have access to any of the data that is in movie data. And whenever movie data changes, we are able to update that. So let's look at a little proof of that. In our old JavaScript code, we did this work to do an image source and we put a height in. Well, we can do that again right here. We can add in our img src, but this time, because it is in our curly braces, we can say movie data dot poster and add a style. And style is kind of weird in React. It takes an object instead of taking a string. So we're going to say height 100. And close that off. And now we have our movie poster. And we can finish that off with our video. And I say video controls width 320, height 240. We will put our source as our SRC, which is going to come from our movie data.video URL, which is a type of video MP4, I think. Video MP4. Save, come over, and you know what? It's not video URL. It is video 1080p. And just like that, we are wowing over in React. So where you guys catch up on that, I will write this out. And the final product should have the little movie poster. Make the height match here to 40. That does not match, but we'll let it be. So you should have the name of the movie poster, and the movie now showing up. Again, this may seem like a lot of work for this tiny little app. We're probably at more lines of code for this than our vanilla JavaScript, but you're starting to see, hey, I can just throw this data in state, and based off of how I have these renders set up, these returns set up, all I have to do is update that thing in state, and all of a sudden the document object model automatically updates for me. So I'm going to push you guys for 3 minutes, 4 minutes. At 6:28, we'll go over the answer. But what I would like you guys to try and do is add a button and make it so that when you click on the button, a different movie pops up. You can do that all with one line of code. Make a button, make it so a different movie pops up when you click on the button. You have 3 minutes now. 6:28, we'll go over the answer.
Correct that.
You've got an
Eh,
extra curly somewhere, or a closing, or a something. Return.
Oh, I think it's, yeah.
Aha.
We go.
Now you're in business.
Thank you.
Of course. Remember, add a button and try make the button make a different movie show up. all in one line of code. All right, let's go over it. So make a button show up. That's pretty easy, right? We just had our button in. Shows up, maybe, add a line break so it's a little bit easier to see it. Now, in JavaScript, we would have to do a document get element by ID. We'd have to put an ID on the button. We'd have to link it to the function. Function would be in our JavaScript already. Be a whole mess, right? To link all of that together. But because we can intermix our JavaScript and our HTML here, we already have this function called make API call. Well, make API call is updating the movie data. So all we need to do is add an on click here that says make API call. Now we come over here, we click wow me, and something kind of interesting happens. The movie updated and the poster updated, but the video clip itself did not. Pesky little. All right, what's happening there? Well, we got our on click, right? And we go, all right, go make the API call. Make API call comes up here. It does another fetch. It parses out the JSON. It sets the movie data in. Set movie data causes this to re-render. We ignore the state because the state is being kept track of re-renders. We ignore this function. We ignore the use effect. The movie data does not go back to loading because it was already loaded in before. And it comes in and goes, oh, there's a new H1, there's a new movie title, there's a new image. I'm going to make those show up. The problem is the browser kind of plays dumb with video sources. The browser looks at that and it goes, all right, well, it doesn't do a good job of realizing that the link has changed. So instead, what we can do is inside this make API call, we can add an if statement up here, up at the top that says if there is already existing movie data. And again, you only need to do this because the video tag does not do a good job of us updating the source on the fly. So we say if there is already movie data when you are making the API call, set the movie data back empty to null. Now look what happens. When I click wow me, it goes to loading for a second and then everything else pops back in. That's actually really cool. Let's trace through that. We say, excuse me, hiccups. "17, make API call is triggered by clicking on the button." Then we come up here and we say 18, check to see if there is already a movie loaded in. 19, there is from the use effect when the page first loaded. So set the movie data to null, which means empty. Now, before we get to 19, React is so quick that it goes, I'm still going to do all of this other stuff down here, but you told me to set the movie data. So now I need to go re-render all of this data. So even though we haven't gotten to down here, even though we haven't even started the fetch yet, it goes back through, jumps all the way down here and says 20. From 19, we emptied the movie data, so show the loading message. Now we jump back up here and say 21, fetch the data again. I'll just do it like this, 8 and 21. 9 and 22. 23. Now we jump down back here and say 24. The movie data has now been loaded from the button press on 17. So show the new movie data. All right, we are done with this project. Take a minute because we hit almost 25 steps here with just showing a header and a image and a video source and a button. So why do we need state? State is a special variable that automatically triggers a re-render whenever it is updated. Why do we need use effect? Use effect allows us to call a function when a variable is updated or a page loads for the first time. It is most commonly used in React, at least in my experience, to make an API call once and only once when the page first loads. Otherwise, we can get ourselves stuck in a loop of making API calls. The API call updates the state. The state is now triggering a re-render. The re-render may make that API call again, which triggers the state. And now all of a sudden we're in a loop. So that use effect and the empty array at the bottom right here are really important to say we only want this API call to run once. Otherwise, we get, again, into this loop because we keep on updating the data. That updating the data makes the API call happen again. So we got state, special variable, can't edit it directly, but when we set it, it triggers a re-render. We have use effect, which is a way of controlling when a function runs, especially when we make an API call when the page first loads. And we've seen the impacts of calling the set function and having the HTML update live based off of the data that has changed. And finally, we have seen when we use state, it is possible that that state will start out as empty because the API call that loads in that state may be empty when the component first loads. So we can avoid that by having this if statement here, which allows us to have more control over our web app to show a loading message until that loading is done. And when that loading is done, we can show the new data that is in here. That also needs to be emptied out before we go load another movie in. So when we have our make API call, we do a check up here to say, hey, if there is already data in here, empty that data out so the loading message shows up again. Then once the data is actually available, trigger the re-render, the loading message will disappear, and our data will show. I'm going to pause there, give you guys 2 minutes, review the numbers, trace all of this through, see if you have any questions. If I am using any terms in the comments that you don't understand, if I'm using any terms in general, really, really important that this stuff sinks in, right? So believe it or not, I am going to shut up for a whole 3 minutes and I'm going to let you guys review this before we move on. Barry, shoot.
So we only use the use effect when we make it like API, like fetching the API, or do we use?
That's going to be the most common place that you use it. So there are other more advanced use cases of it. But if you want to kind of think about it as I want to run this API call only when the page first loads, that's the best way to think about use effect. And that's what the empty array is saying right here, is only do this when the page first loads. Down the road, you can get more clever and you can say, if I put a variable name in there, whenever that variable gets updated, it will automatically do this thing in the use effect. That's kind of the more advanced use case for a use effect. But the most common one for sure will be the page first loads, the API call happens, I set that data into state. State is going to trigger a re-render. I don't want the re-render to make the API call again. So the way that we prevent that loop is by putting it into the use effect. Joe.
So would you be able to go over the different parameters that you could pass through and use effect? The first one's always the function that you're trying to call. But it looks like there's some different things that happen after that you could do if you either didn't put that I think it's the dependency array.
If you don't put the dependency array, it runs every time that the component is updated, which is usually a mistake, but not always necessarily. So I can't think of any time I've put a use effect in where I want it to update every single time that the component re-renders. But it is possible to leave that dependency array out and React won't break. It will just treat it as whenever it re-renders, go do this thing. The other use case that you have for the use effect is when you pass in a variable and you basically say, when this specific variable gets updated, go do this function instead. So you could make it, you could do a separate use effect that basically said, hey, go check whenever the movie data is updated. And when the movie data is updated, go check to see if the movie title equals Cars. And if it does, put a little car icon somewhere on the page. I don't know, example off the top of my head, right? But you could do a use effect, put movie data in the array, and then when that API call happens, when the data is actually loaded in, that use effect would run. So a little example of that. Again, don't follow me on this. Make sure I share my screen. We could say movie data here. And then we could say something like console. Oh, that should be in an array. We could say console log movie just loaded it. And then movie data dot where's movie?
Should it be in the same use effect that you're making the API calling?
No, because we want this to run when the page first loads. You get into a circular dependency of it triggering a loop. It probably does not like line 45. Let's just say if the movie data is loaded in, then log that out. Okay, so movie just loaded, it's the internship. There's a weird thing on dev where it loads twice. Once you push this code to production, it wouldn't. But if you reload this, you'll see that it triggers that. That's because movie data updated for the again, And so this use effect was triggered because the dependency is triggering the effect of whatever we put in here.
Gotcha.
And beyond that, I do not know what other use cases. I have used use effect outside of just loading APIs. And it is sometimes helpful to be like, oh, if this particular variable gets updated, go do this other thing. Like, oh, if the modal gets opened, go, I don't know, send an alert that someone's on our website to Slack or something like that. So you can use effect for other things, but to Terry's point, 95% of your use cases will be the page's first loading to prevent an infinite API call loop. Do a use effect to make the API call. Other questions on this?
Okay, so the make API call is the setup, right? For the use effect.
The make API call is the function that the use effect executes.
And then the movie data that you deleted was the dependency.
Yes, if we don't specify a dependency, if we just pass it an empty array, it will only execute that when the component first renders, but not after any subsequent re-renders.
Yeah, I was just I'm just looking at the documentation for the use effect, so I'm just trying to understand it a little.
Yeah. No, it's good. Other questions? Give me a quick vibe check on 1 to 5, only what, 4 days into React now, maybe 3 days into React. How are we feeling about it? Are we feeling like we're liking it? Are we feeling, obviously we need more exposure. We're gonna get more practice with it. We have an entire week and a half left of this. So we're gonna get more React practice, but are we thinking maybe it's worth learning? Or are we thinking this just seems like more complicated JavaScript and JavaScript's complicated enough? And feel free to post in the chat too.
I don't want to give it like review while having to learn a little bit more, but if I were to like do it like have the rating like right now, probably like maybe a 3 because I was working over the weekend. I was working on a number counter, but using like React, so I have a better understanding with use state. But yeah, you just do like a whole nother like concept. So I'm like, oh crap, not gonna learn the use effect. So
Oh, just hold on to your hat because we're about to get into props in the second half of class tonight, which is a whole other concept, as well as reusable components, which are props and reusable components go hand in hand. Four's promising. Short moment of confusion, right? This is a little trickier because it's definitely less linear, right? Our brains like to go in 1, 2, 3 order. And this is kind of jumping around. But because the computer is able to jump around so quickly, it's doing some kind of cool things in the background for us, like making the loading text show up without us having to go out of our way, update the DOM, and do all of that work, right? We're able to just clear it out, set it to null, and React is smart enough to react to that data change in state and go, oh, show the loading screen while that API call is happening in the background. All right. We're in a pretty good spot here. Final questions for this. I did just push it up to GitHub. So you are welcome to reference that, check out those numbers tonight, read through all that documentation again. If you have any questions, as always, one-on-ones, Slack, totally fine. It is not a requirement to do your capstone in React. However, most people by the end of the end of next week do start to see the benefits of React, of being able to update data, of not having to work in the document object model, and probably most importantly, being able to build reusable components. So we are going to do the project setup for the weather project now. And then we will go on break. And when we come back from dinner, we'll dive into actually getting it all running and built out and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to close out of my VS Code here. That is going to break the live share link. I will post another one. I am going to close out of everything. The most important thing is to make sure that your terminal is closed out from that project, because or the entire window that had that terminal in it, because otherwise it will be a zombie. It will be running in the background. And when we start up this other React project, it's going to be confused and it's going to be like, whoa, something's already running on 3000. We need to pick some other port because that's already running. So make sure the window is closed out entirely. I am going to go back to my terminal, Command Space to pop it open. This time, for whatever reason, it put me up in my home folder. And I know that because if I run pwd, it shows me I'm in Hack Upstate. Now we can use the trick of using CD space, dragging and dropping it, but it is good to get some terminal practice here. So in order to figure out what my list of options are of where I can go into, I'm going to ls. And ls is going to tell me, because I'm in my home folder, I can get into my desktop. So I'm going to cd, I'm going to type in de and hit tab. And tab is like autocomplete in the terminal. It goes, oh, well, there's no other folders called DE or that start with DE, so desktop will autocomplete. I'm going to CD one more time into my C6, my code. Again, I'm relying on autocomplete here, so I can type in CD space C6 and hit enter. And I'm going to ls again and see that the week 14 folder is where I want to get down into. So the last time I'm going to cd into week 14. And if all of that worked, I can pwd and see I've made it all the way down there. If you're like, dear God, I missed a step and I cannot get into my desktop folder or something's not working, you can always cd space, go into Finder, grab your week 14 folder, drag and drop it in, and hit enter. And to prove that worked, you can run a pwd and make sure that you are down in your week 14 folder. If you've made it all the way down into your week 14 folder, Terry, do you have a question?
Yeah, you need to like slow down. I like so I try to do like the shortcut with the desktop, and then it's I don't know, it's just not popping up for me. Well, I mean,
Okay, so
like, yeah.
First things first, pwd and hit enter. Where does it say you are?
C6.
Okay, so you can't get into your desktop because you're already in C6, which is on your desktop. So run an ls. What comes back from your ls?
The weeks.
So you don't need to cd into desktop. You don't need to cd into my code. You are already in my code. So now you can just cd into whatever week 14 you want to get into. So terminal is one of those things where it's like the goal is not to keep up with me. That's definitely not the goal, right? The goal is to say, can I pwd so I know where the hell I am? Can I ls so I know where the hell I can go to? And can I cd into one of those folders so I am now in a new spot? So you want to think about the terminal and those 3 commands as kind of like, you know, like when they do like robotics classes and they're like, you're trying to get to this point over here, but your only 6 options are, or your only options are turn left, turn right, and move forward, right? And you're like, all right, well, in order to get over there, I've got to turn right twice, and then I've got to take a step forward. Then I need to turn again and then take another step, right? And you kind of follow the path that way. The same goes for the terminal. When I open my terminal, beginning of class for some reason, it put me down into my code folder. I'm like, how did I end up here? Well, when I reopened the terminal again tonight, it put me all the way up in my home folder. So sometimes it can dump you in an unexpected location, and that's where you want to be comfortable of saying, all right, well, if I woke up and didn't know where I was, how would I find where I'm at? That's going to be your PWD. Well, how do I know where I'm going to go? That's going to be your LS. And then, well, how do I actually step forward? How do I move into that? That's going to be your CD command. And with a combination of all 3 of those, hopefully it's a little less, oh my God, I got to keep up with Max, and a little bit more, I see where I'm trying to go. Let me use a combination of those 3 to see if I can get there. And I'm not trying to chastise you there for the speed comments, totally fine, but hopefully that gives you a little bit more context as why I can go so fast, because it's just always a combination of those 3.
Yeah, definitely.
And terminal's one of those things that like you're just afraid of until you're suddenly not. And I think once you have your light bulb moment on those 3 commands and you understand, oh, everything I'm doing is actually in a folder, I just can't visually see the folder that I'm in, then terminal becomes a lot easier to work with. Okay. We should be in our week 14 folder, but not in our day 1 WoW folder. We do not want to be in D1 WoW. Putting a React project in a React project just makes your computer implode. Just smoke comes out of it. It is not a, no, I'm just kidding. But React gets really confused if we put a React project in a React project. So we don't want to do that. So again, one final time, do a PWD. Make sure you are only in week 14. If you are seeing D1 WoW as part of your folder path, like this, if you run a PWD and you see that you're in your day 1 WoW, you are 1 folder too deep. To go up 1 folder, you type in CD space and 2 periods. Period. That will move you up a folder level, and now you will see you are in week 14 day, week 14 no day. So we're going to create our new project, create React app weather. I'm sorry, create React app, and we're going to call it day 1 weather. We'll paste this command into the Zoom chat. Be very careful with your spaces and your dashes here. NPX is node package executor. It is executing create React app, which is a utility that we are using, and we are calling our project name D1 weather. Never a good idea to have spaces in your project name. It's going to go through and fire up React again. I will let that run in the background. I'm going to head to my Finder. I'm going to grab my day 1 weather, and I am going to go ahead and drag that into my VS Code. We know create React app is done when we see our source folder over here with our app.js. So until we see our source folder with our app.js, we are not going to fire anything up in the terminal. Again, I am making sure that I am grabbing day 1 weather. I am not opening all of week 14 in my VS Code. I'm only opening the day 1 weather, so it doesn't get confused and it doesn't think I'm trying to run WoW and anything going on over there. Once I do have that set up, I can open in integrated terminal. I can npm run start. I will have my local host 3000 running over here with the spinning React logo. And I'm going to do two final things before I go on break. I'm going to pop open the SRC. I'm going to go to my app.css and I'm going to delete all of that out. I'm going to go to, I'm actually going to put that down in the bottom half of my screen because for the first time we are going to be working with some CSS here. And I'm also going to pop open my app.js, clear out the header that's in there, and leave only the div behind. New live share link is in the chat. Yes, you should empty out your CSS and you should delete out the header tag. And other than those two files, we do have to do a little bit more setup with Bootstrap, but we will do that after the break. If you would like, you can also pop open your reference code. Weather was week 2, day 3. So I'm also going to pop open my week 2, day 3 code so I can reference that as we go. But if you would prefer to just reference mine, that is okay. And I will do a second live share. And I lied. We are going to do attendance and then you can go on break. Attendance, the secret word for tonight is use effect. One word or two, use effect is the secret word for attendance tonight. Take attendance, go on break, be back at 7:25. Stick around for 2 minutes in case anyone needs help getting set up. We have deleted out the header tag in our app.js. We have run npm run start in the terminal, and we have cleared out our app.css in the new project. Secret word for attendance tonight is use effect. On break 7:25. Shoot.
No, it was just like a weird question. But when we was in the terminal, how come we don't do the we don't type npm instead of like the mpx?
Yeah, so good question. npx is a package executor. npm is node package manager. So node package manager is what we use to install packages, uninstall packages, run couple things. But it's basically to say, hey, we are managing the other packages that we're installing into our projects. NPX is kind of similar and managed by, I believe, the same team, but we're not like, oh, go install Create React App. We don't really care if Create React App is installed. We want it to execute Create React App. We want it to do the thing that Create React App does. So NPX, X stands for executor, should be E, but it is basically saying, no, we don't want this installed. We want you to just run whatever that command does, compared to npm, which is saying go download this and install it so I can use it as part of my own code. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I just have like one more question before I let you go.
Yeah.
Break. So what's so I looked at this video and he was like giving like, because I was trying to learn React a little bit more, and he did something with the terminal. I think it's, I don't know how you say it. It's spelled VITE.
Vite or Vite?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is
It's
that what we're gonna be using for like TypeScript, or can we use that for like React too? Like how's it that?
very good question. You can use it for React. It is I don't want to say the newer version of Create React app, but the React community is slowly moving away from you'll hear it referred to as CRA, which is Create React app. Everyone seems to be moving over to Vite or Vite. I should really learn how to say it. We haven't made the switch yet. But if you want to think about Vite as the newer version of Create React app, they both accomplish the same thing. Just Vite tends to be a little bit more powerful because they give you more options as you were setting up your project, such as, do you want to use TypeScript or do you want to use regular JavaScript for this project? So we won't be covering it, but it is the newer alternative to Create React app and accomplishes the same thing.
Gotcha. Thanks, Max.
No problem. See you after break. Did any questions pop up over the break about anything that we had done in either the WoW app or in project setup? Is anyone stuck? Does anyone not have a plain white page hanging out on localhost 3000? I also popped open my week 2 day 3 code just so that I could reference what we already had working. So just as a reminder to everyone, this was our weather application that we had built. So we're going to do this in kind of 2 steps. One, we're going to move all of these all of this design over to our React project. We're going to see a couple differences between the two. And the main goal here is so that you can see, hey, I've already got my capstone built out mostly in HTML, but we're going to do a couple of these projects so that you can see over time, this is how I kind of move that code into React, as well as identifying those reusable pieces or components of it that will make my code easier to maintain in the long run. So, excuse me. Tonight, we are going to see the first reusable component here. We are going to go ahead and build this out all in React, and then we are going to layer in an actual weather API so that we can see, hey, how do we get that data actually showing up using state, getting more practice with it, all of that kind of stuff. So first things first, when I look at the reference code, the code that we did all the way back in week 2, day 3, the first thing that I notice here is that I have this link tag. Well, when I'm looking at my React code, I don't have a head tag, right? And I'm like, well, where am I supposed to put that? If we pop open our files and look in the public folder, there's this special index.html. And we need to be very careful in here because we can't modify anything in this div ID root. In fact, it's usually a bad idea to put anything in this index.html unless there's a very clear reason you want to put some static HTML in the body, or more commonly, you actually want to update the head tag, right? So in here, we have our title tag. That is completely safe to update. We'll go ahead and call that, I don't know, call it React Weather. And I'm going to take my link tag from my week 2, day 3 code, and I'm going to go ahead and paste that in underneath my title tag. So the way that we install Bootstrap in React, we actually can do it through NPM. And there are some advantages of doing it through NPM, but we haven't quite worked our way up to NPM packages yet and understanding how those are working. So for now, we are just going to pop it in into our head tag in our public index.html file. Again, there are pros and cons of doing it this way compared to doing it through NPM to install it. But for now, this will totally do for our project. So I'm going to go ahead and save that and close out, go back to my app.js. And the first thing I notice here is, hey, I've got a div class ID container. And what you may be tempted to do is find this closing div tag, scroll all the way down and go, oh, that's only 60 some lines of code. Let me just throw that whole thing in there. And it's very, very easy to get overly ambitious and get lost and have a broken state of code that's just going to leave you sobbing. So instead, what we're going to do is go component or div by div, piece by piece to make sure, hey, what we're pulling over here actually is working as I pull the whole thing over. So I'm going to go back up to the top and I'm going to just start with my div class container. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. I'm going to head over to my app.js file and I'm going to go ahead and paste that container in. I take a look in my React and I pop open my console. Always a good idea to have your console open whenever you're working on anything JavaScript related. And of course, React is using JavaScript under the hood. And we see a kind of interesting error there. It says invalid DOM property class. Did you mean class name? Well, it turns out React actually has a little too much of a love-hate relationship with JavaScript. The problem is that class in JavaScript is a special reserved word. Class is related to object-oriented programming, which JavaScript can be used for. And so React didn't really want to get things messed up there. They didn't want to call something a class in HTML when class already meant something in JavaScript. So because React is more JavaScripty than it is Reacty, they changed the name of or the HTML class here. So what they did is they said instead of calling it just class, everything in React will use class name instead. And so if we save that, come over here, the error is still there. That's because it's still hanging around from the last time it loaded in. So if I just refresh that, the console goes away and I can see my classes are now, well, I can't really see it. There's nothing in my container, but the error is now gone. So first thing that we see in React when we are taking our HTML over, class name instead of class. Now I'm going to come back over here and I've got my row and I've got a call to center with my weather icon. I don't want to get overly ambitious here, so I'm just going to take the row and my weather icon. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste that in, and then I will remember to close out my row. So I save that, I take a look, and I got a teeny tiny little icon. I'm like, okay. Well, my icon doesn't look very teeny tiny over here. So while I'm moving my HTML over div by div and making sure it's working, my CSS is a little bit safer to move over in a giant chunk, right? So I'm going to hop over to my original code. I'm going to take my entire style.css. I'm going to head over to my app.css and just paste that sucker in. Go ahead and save that. Take a look in my React code, and now I've got another stupid error message. Again, invalid DOM property class. Did you mean class name? Yes, I did. Would you just shut up and do it for me, right? Well, there's a way to kind of tell VS Code to do that. It's a little manual, but it is a very handy tool when you're moving your HTML code over. Now, because you guys are just learning this, there will be a lot of moving HTML over both in your capstone and projects we're doing in class. But out in the working world, you'll be either starting a project from scratch or working on a project where, as a junior developer, these decisions have already been made for you. They will already say, well, we looked at React and Vue and Vanilla.js and Angular, and we picked React because this, and this. And so that's what we're using. Here's the project we've already started. At which point you'll be writing React code right out of the gate. But in class, because we have built up all of our HTML knowledge, we need to get that practice converting it over to React code. So I just want to throw that out there. If you're like, Max, this is the 19th project we've moved over to React, that is just because the learning journey that you guys are on, right? Okay, so back to where I was. I would like to not have to manually rename my class to my class name every single time. So I'm going to go into my VS Code and hit Command F on that. I'm going to type in class equals. Why do I need the equals there? Because if I take it out, you can see it's already finding the class names that I've converted over. If I don't put the equals in there, it's going to replace my class names with my class name names, and I don't want it to do that. So I'm going to say class equals, and I'm going to replace it with class name equals. And you know React loves a good camel casing here. So the N is capital in class name. I'm going to hit this replace all button, and you will see that I screwed it up. I did forget to put my second equals in after class name. So I can Command Z to put it back. I'm going to put my class name equals here and hit replace, and it will replace both of those for me. I save, I come over, I've got my icon, and if I refresh, I've got my error away. Does anyone not have a decent sized icon or have any errors or any questions about find and replace? Okay. The rest of this should go pretty easy. I'm going to pop back into my VS Code. I'm feeling pretty confident now. The rest of this data, just columns going across. I've got one showing up in the right spot. I'm feeling confident to take up the rest of the row. So I'm going to click on my div class row. I'm going to scroll all the way down until I find the end of my row. I'm going to copy that all the way up to everything except the first column. Why not the first column? Because I already took that first column over. So I'm going to copy all of that. I'm going to come back in to my VS Code. Now I've got, or my React code, I've got div soup going on here. I need to make sure that I am closing out right after this call to. So I'm going to put my cursor after the call to, paste it in, and save. And you will find React has lost its crap. What's going on there? Well, it turns out that React doesn't really like HTML comments. It would prefer all of its comments to be in JavaScript, and it would prefer that JavaScript to be in curly braces. So whenever we bring over an HTML comment, we need to click on that line and hit Command/ on it. And that Command/ will convert the HTML comment in a JavaScript comment. It will wrap the JavaScript comment in those curly braces. React is now happy with us. I also need to come down, find the end of my row 1, comment that out as well. Now, it's looking better. I've brought all of my content over. I still have an error here. Now there are 5 different places I still have class equals instead of class name equals. So I am going to fix that by hitting my replace all button. That switches all of my class names to class name instead of just class. I refresh over here, and I am now good to go. So we've seen class equals has to go to class name equals, find and replace can help us there. HTML comments React doesn't really like. We convert them to JavaScript comments and everything is fine. Any questions about any of that? Okay. Oh yeah, go for it.
I don't know if it's an issue with my container. It looks like it is. I imported the CSS exactly, and I even copied yours to see if it would do if I had something different in mind.
George,
it's running
let's
right
take a look.
into the. Yeah, it's just running right into the.
Definitely doesn't like something.
Here, I can bring back a little bit here.
All right. Let me request remote.
I
First
copied
thing
your
I'm gonna
code there, but
check is
oh, I did not put Bootstrap in there. That might be an issue.
sure that should fix it.
Okay.
Anytime rows or columns don't work, first thing I do is I go, I think Bootstrap's going on something there. Anyone else need help? All right, so not really anything really app related going on here, right? And it's like, all right, why did we do all this work? Why did we move this code over, make it class name, deal with the React nature of things? This is really one of the first benefits we're seeing of React outside of use state and just making it update the document object model, which we will also see again in this project. But what's going on here? Well, when we made this for the first time, we did a row, and there's something really repetitive going on here. It's a call with a text center, with the day, the icon, 28 degrees. And then we repeat it, and we say call, text center, the day, the icon, another temperature. And we do it all over again. We say a call, the day, an icon, the temperature. Really freaking repetitive, isn't it? Wouldn't it be nice if we could just say, hey, this is what one forecast day looks like. And we would like that forecast day to show up 5 times. Let's look into that. I'm going to come back into my React code and I'm going to make a new file. That file that I'm going to make must be inside the SRC folder. It is so easy to accidentally create that new file outside of the SRC folder, and React will go off like a nuclear bomb. We do not want to put this outside of it. So to be extra sure I am inside the SRC folder, I'm going to right click on the SRC folder and hit new file inside of that. You will notice that file is now underneath the SRC, indented just a tiny little bit. Again, please make sure it is in the SRC, the source folder. And we are going to call that forecastday.js. Now, for the very first time, we are going to make our own component from scratch. So how do we do that? We're going to say const forecast day. And component names always start with a capital letter. We usually camel case them except for the capital letter at the beginning. And we're going to make that equal to a function. Now that function always has to return something. To get started, we are going to just make it return an empty div. And I don't know, we'll say day goes here. Now, in order to be able to use this forecast day in another file, before we can import it in that file, we need to export it in this file. So we're going to say export, and the default thing that's coming out of this file is going to be the forecast day. Now we're going to save that. I look in my browser, nothing shows up. Okay, well, nothing's showing up because we exported it. We haven't imported it yet. So we're going to go back over to our app.js. I'm going to go all the way up to the top, and I'm going to say import forecast day from /forecast day. This is the name of the variable that we're importing in so that we can use it in our code. From is the keyword, so it knows the path is coming. And this // means from the same directory that app.js is in. So you'll see there's something called a relative path that is all represented by a period showing the current folder or 2 periods showing a folder up from this folder. That gets really helpful when you're working in different folders. You have components that end up getting grouped together. It is entirely possible to have more than one component in the same file, but there are also benefits to splitting that out into another file so that you can organize your code a little bit more easily. So I am now going to build this out. I'm going to look at my original code, everything had an HR and then a div class row. So I'm going to keep that. I'm going to go down to the bottom of my container, which is indeed this div. So I'm inside of that div. I'm going to put my header row in before I forget about it, right? So I get that nice line between the current weather and the next upcoming week's weather. And I'm going to put a div class name row in. So I've got a place to put all of my forecast stuff. Now I kind of run into something interesting. I have it imported in my JavaScript up here, but I'm not really in JavaScript at this point. I'm in my return, right? I'm working down in my React code. So I can come down here and I can now declare my forecast day. I go ahead and save that. I come over to my browser and I get day goes here. And I'm like, ooh, that's kind of cool. Does that mean that if I take this and put it in 5 times, I get 5 day goes here? Pausing there, let me catch up for a second. Our forecast day, I see something in the chat, a function, it's returning out a div. This is our first component we have made from scratch. We export it here so that we can import it up at the top. We called it forecast day here, which means we can use our forecast day down here. Yes, forecast day is not an HTML element. It's not built into HTML, but because we imported that in through React, we are able to reuse that component and get that showing up as many times as we would like. The difference between export and export default is that if you are exporting more than one thing, there is a way that you can alter the import statement to use curly braces to import multiple of those things. So if you're curious about that, you can look into ES6 modules. They cover the difference between export default and just regular export. But basically, if there's only one thing coming out of the file, it's usually a good idea to name it as the default export. If you have multiple things coming out of the file, it's still a good idea to have a default export, but then you change your import syntax to be able to handle multiple things coming out of the export. If I remember towards the end of React or the beginning of Node, I will go over the different syntaxes of import and export. We'll also talk about ES6 modules and the older CommonJS modules that Node used for a very long time. That may be the require syntax that you've seen if you've done any backend code. That the require keyword uses the CommonJS syntax, which again is falling out of style, but you'll still see it in a lot of backend code. So we should cover both of those. Okay. If we've got our forecast day going on and we put 5, oh, does anyone need help before we keep going? We should have 5 day goes here down here at the bottom.
I might need some help.
Yep. Go ahead, share screen. Okay, your forecast day looks fine. Let's take a look at your app.js. And it's imported fine. Go down to where you called your forecast day. Okay, nope. I'm confused. Let me request remote. Forecast day. Forecast day. Forecast day. Maybe, yep, just needed to refresh.
Thank you.
Never mind. I don't see it. It's got to be the computer. It's the computer. The order that you do that matters. So if you try to do the import before you're done with the export, sometimes that can cause the problem. Any other questions? Anyone need help? Okay. So here's the beauty of using this over 5 times is that I can update it in one file and it will automatically update that everywhere. So I can go into my forecast day. I'm going to go back to my reference code and I'm going to go, oh, my forecast day looks like this every single day. So I'm going to copy this entire column, go into my forecast day, and go ahead and paste that on top of my div. I save that, I take a look, and just like that, I now have 5 columns with my icons all properly formatted, even though I updated it only in one file. All right, that's pretty cool, but there's a glaring problem here. What is my problem? Other than it's snowing in the middle of July. It's Thursday every day of the week. Problematic. 28 degrees in July would also be problematic. I would have taken that as an answer. But yes, Thursday every day. We got to fix that. So we can't really change this because if we just make it Friday here, now it's Friday every day of the week, and that's a different problem. I'm less concerning, but we got a problem. We need some way to say in here, hey, we would like to give you the day name, and then you can take that day name and make it show up inside of your component. So what we can do is add something called a prop. And a prop looks a lot like an HTML attribute. Very similar, except in React, we call it a prop instead of an attribute. And that prop, we are going to pass in the day of the week. So we'll say Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Now, if I save that, nothing changes over here. If I add in each one of those props, I need to then tell React, hey, you are going to be receiving a prop called day. Now, there are two different syntaxes. No, three. There are 3 different syntaxes you can use with props. We're only going to cover one tonight, but I will show you how to use the other ones as we work on different projects. So what we are going to do is head into forecast day, and you notice that there's an empty parameter array up here. Well, what we can do is say, hey, one of the props that get set in is going to be accessible in the first parameter of this component. So what we are able to do is throw some curly braces in there and say, hey, you are going to get a prop called day. And whatever the day is here has to line up with whatever we called the prop right here. So because we called it day here, we can now use day anywhere in this component. Well, that's super handy because I can put curly braces in here, and these curly braces mean something else. Because they are in our HTML section of our React code, not in the JavaScript part of it, we now know, hey, you're going to do something JavaScripty here. Go get access to the day. Now we've got some trickling down here. We go from forecast day to day, forecast day to day, day to day down here. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And now I've got my Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday going on. Still have to fix the icons. We still have to fix the temperature. But before we get too far into that, we're actually going to update this app to pull in live API weather data. In order to do that, we are going to use an API called the Open Weather Map API, and we need to get an API key for that. Sometimes those keys take a minute to activate, so we're going to do that step now. Then we're going to set up our data structure, and then we're going to go back in and try and get that data to show up in our component. Going to pause here first, though. Does anyone have questions? Does anyone not have their days of the week showing? Kind of seeing components working. We're kind of getting the idea. Reusable code, can change up the props a little bit, get the data to show up a little bit. We'll do more projects. We got blog coming down, coming back. That's lots of little components and routing and all kinds of fun stuff there, but slowly introducing you to components and props.
Mine's showing up, but it's showing everything vertical.
Including your first row.
No, just the forecast day stuff.
Okay, go ahead and share your screen. You may be missing a div class row somewhere or a div class call. Yes, take your yellow div out on 3 and 9.
Oh,
And
now I'm not
then
getting.
replace line 4
Oh.
with day in curly braces.
Sweet.
There you go.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Every time I do this project, they have changed their website and it screws me up every time. So we're gonna give it a try. I've pasted the link in the chat. I just noticed there's an error in the console. We will fix that in a second. Openweathermap.org. Everyone needs to get their own API keys. Because I'm sharing my API key with you guys, well, kind of sharing it with you guys via screen share, I will deactivate mine every night before it posts on YouTube. So don't use mine. Go out, get your own. It is totally free for what we are pulling in. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the sign in button. I will create account. Go ahead and enter your username, email, and password here. Hopefully you all are 16 years or older because that's a requirement of our program. Agree with privacy policy. You do not need these 3 checked. You do not need to get email alerts. I'm not a robot. And then go ahead and create your account. I believe I already have an account, so I am going to sign into mine instead. And again, getting this set up is always a bumpy process. So apologies in advance. Oh, well, apparently I don't have an account either, so I'm going to be with you guys and creating one. Unless it's under... Okay. They may send you a confirmation email that you need to click on, possibly, maybe not. Maybe you can just sign in directly. Once you do sign in, you should be able to click on your name in the top right and go down to My API Keys. And I'm going to go ahead and delete mine out. maybe I'm not. Over on the right, you should see create key. Someone confirm for me that you have a create key section. Yes. And you can go ahead and call that like React Weather. Go ahead and hit the generate button, and it will say API key was created successfully. So you should have that. We are going to open a new tab and go to the open weather map. And what does everyone think the next step might be here? Got our API key. What do we do now? What was that?
What section are you in?
Once we get our API key, we go up here down to my API keys. We create our key. It gives us this thing. I don't know what to do.
Don't we usually have to make a fetch request?
Make a fetch request, but what am I supposed to fetch to, right? Yeah, we got this API. It's great. It's telling you to use it. We got to know how to use it, right? And that goes for any API. What did we do when we were at Owen Wilson? We didn't just go to fetch and start doing it. We need to know the URL. We need to know where they want us to put the API key. We need to know what data is coming back. We need to know if you've got multiple endpoints. That's the point of documentation, right? So yes, I can point you in this direction, but what do we need to be able to get back here? Well, we want to be able to get back the current temperature. We want to be able to get back the forecast data. There's all kinds of information that we're displaying here that would be kind of nice to have hooked up to a real API. So we've got real data flowing in through this, right? So we are going to go back to their homepage, head over to their API, and here they have all of their documentation. And there is a pay as you call, but they say you get 1,000 API calls for free per day. That's going to be plenty for us, right? And in fact, they don't really have a credit card either, so they're going to just shut down your account if you exceed that 1,000. That's okay. So this one call API is exposed here, and what I'm looking at is current weather and forecasts. That looks kind of interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and now I'm in their documentation. And their documentation is showing me, hey, we need to make a call here. And we pass in the latitude, the longitude, and our API key. And because they didn't specify a API method, they didn't tell us it's a post, they didn't tell us it's a put, they didn't tell us it's a patch, we can assume that it is a GET request. So the only thing I don't know is the exclude part, and they say it's optional. So they say by using this parameter, you can exclude some parts of the weather data from the API response, should be comma separated, currently, minute, hour, daily, and alerts. So we probably want current, and we probably want the daily, but we probably don't want the alerts, the hourly, or the minutely. So we're going to build this URL based off of what we want to pull back. Down the road, we'll probably want to get fancy with multiple locations, latitude and longitude. Down the road, I mean by tomorrow, but for tonight, let's just try and get some data showing up from this API in our React app. So I'm going to start, because it's a GET request, I don't need to head over to Postman. So I'm going to go again to this one call API, and I'm going to copy that first URL that they have under the current section, current and forecast weather data, how to make API call. I'm copying that URL, I'm pasting it in a new tab. Now I'm going to build up my my URL here a little bit. So I'm going to head back to the members tab. I'm going to grab my API key and I'm going to paste it into the URL, replacing the curly braces and what's inside of it with my actual API key. Then I'm going to go a step further. What else do I need? I need the latitude and the longitude. So I'm going to say lat and long of Syracuse, New York. And Google is going to help me out here with the exact coordinates. Of course, you're welcome to use whatever positioning you would like. I will just pull Syracuse here. So I'll move that into a new tab. And I'm going to say the latitude here, and I'll paste my final URL here into the Zoom chat if you don't want to dial it in like I am. But just seeing what these parameters are, I'm trying to build up to get the data that I want. So my latitude is going to be 43.0481, and my longitude is going to be 76.1474. And then finally, I'm going to exclude, and I don't need the alerts or the minutely or the hourly. And if I hit enter on that, I told you it screws me over every single time. Okay, stand by. I don't want to enter payment. Uh, okay. Slight audible. The one call API, which sounds lovely to use, is not actually free. They do give you free calls, but you got to set up your credit card for it. So we're going to do a slight change so we don't have to set up the credit card. We are going to use the version number is 2.5 here instead, and we're going to use the forecast call. If you hit enter on that, you will get a invalid API key. That is normal. The problem with that is that these API keys take like 30 minutes for them to activate, and I finally have learned my lesson on that. So I'm going to paste my final URL with everything except the actual API key into the chat. So, and Safi, sorry, I just saw your answer to the question. The Zoom chat likes to disappear every time I start sharing my screen again, and it drives me nuts. So I pasted the URL in there. What you need to do is copy that and then put your API key at the end. If you are getting invalid API key, again, that is normal. We're just waiting for the API key to actually activate over here. So we can, while we're waiting for that, we can get a set up on the React side, on the fetch side, so that when we are ready to go with all of that, we can pull in the data live, make it update our forecast. So I'm going to minimize this for now. Again, we'll come back to this, but hopefully you have a code 401 invalid API key. Just make sure that you do have your API key that you generated at the end of that URL. We're going to minimize this for now, and we'll come back to it, piece apart the data, and go from there. Any questions? Anyone not have the invalid API key message? Again, it's the 2.5 and the forecast are part of the URL. We have our latitude and longitude set and our API key in at the end.
I just use the default API key. I don't know if that's from when I set up my account during when you were running cohort 5, but I had one in there that I could use, so it was ready.
Does anyone else have an API key that is working? Okay, so it is just a cohort 5 thing. And again, this is normal. It just takes 30 minutes for it to activate. So now that we've got it all set up, we can go back over to our React code side and get everything going over there. So we're going to come back into our app.js, and we just learned, hey, this data is going to get displayed to the user. So we need useState. It's coming from an API call. So we need useEffect, and we need to deal with the loading of that data before the end user sees it. So we got to set all of that up. I'm going to come back up to the very top part of my app.js, and I am going to say const forecast data and set forecast data is equal to a useState that is going to start out empty. Be careful if you don't use your autocomplete. If it did not autocomplete, you may need to come up to the top of the file and import both useState and useEffect from React. We also need our useEffect. Whenever I write out my useEffect, of course, I put the function in, but before I put anything in the function, it is so easy to forget that empty array at the end. That empty array at the end is so important. Otherwise, you will make an infinite loop of API calls. No bueno, not a good idea. So before you put anything in the function of your useEffect, go ahead and make sure you have that comma empty array in at the end. I'm telling you, I've seen it a gazillion times. It's not pretty. So we don't want to forget that. It's one of my least favorite things about React and the syntax that they chose for that. Now, inside our useEffect, we can get this set up to make the API call set it into the data. So we are going to say const make API call is an async function. It's going to do some stuff, and we're going to make the API call down at the end. Now, you may notice this is slightly different than the way we made the API call for Owen Wilson. Owen Wilson, we made the API call outside of the useEffect, but then we called the function inside of it. Why did we do that? Well, because I knew we wanted to link that button up to the make API call function. In this situation, we only want to make that API call when the page is first loaded. So it's fine to put it right inside of the useEffect. UseEffects don't like to be asynchronous themselves, but they have no problems having async functions inside of them. Now we got to do the work here to make the API call. I'm going to pause there. We've got our import, so we're pulling it in. We've got our state set up so that it can reflect that information to the end user. We've got inside our use effect our make API call, which is async. We call that function, and we also have our empty array. Now we make our API call. We're going to say const res equals and await fetch. And I'm going to go ahead and grab my URL and throw my URL into my fetch. I am going to say get my data, which is going to come from my awaiting my res.json. I am going to set my forecast data into my state using the data. And I will finally console log out my data so I know what we're working with. And by just stalling long enough to let our API keys activate, if we take a look at our console, check out the data we are getting. We are getting some cool information, like it feels like 292 degrees in Syracuse right now. Seems like a healthy temperature for 8:17 at night. But if you got everything rocking and rolling here with your use state and your use effect and your API URL properly formatted, you should see some data in the console. I also noticed that we are in use Nekagok in a country called KZ. Think I screwed up some latitude and longitude there, but we'll pause there, make sure you've got some data coming back, even though apparently it's feels like temperature of 292 degrees. We've got some work to do. That's okay. Any API, we've got work to do.
I definitely forgot I made an account like a long time ago. So I try to use like the API key for that one.
All right, let's get out of Kazakhstan. I believe we can fix that by setting our longitude to negative 76.147. I save that. And now take a look. I've made it to Syracuse with just going negative. So that is a fix for the longitude. It should be negative 76 because we are on the other side of the wherever that line is. Yay, geography. And then the other thing that we can fix is we still are getting, if we look in our list, we're getting a feels like temperature in 295. Prime meridian, that's what I was looking for. I knew it wasn't the equator. It was whatever it was. Thank you, Austin. I wanted to say Greenwich Mean Time, and then I'm like, no, that's a different line. That's somewhere else. So, anyway, I swear I am decent with geography. I do know how to read a map. The other problem is our feels like is 295, and I happen to know what the answer to that is because I've used this API so many times, but I don't know how to fix that off the top of my head, right? Because 295 clearly is not what it feels like outside. So if we go back to our API documentation, we can scroll down a little bit in the forecast, and it shows us the response fields. And then it does say this temperature parameter accounts for human perception of weather, unit default Kelvin. I'm like, who the hell wants a temperature in Kelvin? I'm not freaking NASA, you know? Like, give it to me. Like, I could get it if it was in Celsius, but you're telling me in Kelvin? Come on, get out of here. So we could do that conversion ourselves, right? We could figure out what that is, and that would be a pain in the ass, but we could do it. But fortunately, if we look a little deeper here, there's something somewhere. If we just scroll up a little bit, it will list out parameters, and you see there's another thing here that says units, and it says optional. And then it says standard, metric, and imperial units are available. If you do not use units, standard will imply will be applied by default. But we want the imperial units, right? So I'm going to go back to my code. I'm going to go to the very end of my URL. I'm going to add an ampersand at the end of it and say units equals imperial. I save, I come back into Chrome, I take a look in my console and make sure you're scrolled down to the most recent API call. And now all of a sudden, our temp is 72.86, feels like actual temp 72.14. All right. I can live with that. So we're going to finish up tonight. Again, you should be able to see temps in your console, digging into that data level a little bit. We're going to have to do some work here to figure out why there are 40 different things in this array, but we'll work our way up to that. That's okay. For now, we'll finish it up by we set the data into our console. So I'm going to come down to my before my return and say, hey, if the forecast data is not there, if it is not loaded in yet, don't try and show it, don't try and access information in it, just return out a H1 that says loading. And we will pick up there tomorrow of how do we work with that data? How do we get that data to show up? Some fun stuff like icons, we'll make it interactive, take a look at a couple different location information, all different kinds of fun stuff coming down the pipeline in the weather app. But hopefully this gives you a taste of use effect in two different projects. We're seeing a little bit more of use state. And for the first time, we've seen something we cannot do in vanilla JavaScript and HTML itself. We have now built a reusable component. So tomorrow, we will dive into, well, how can we reuse that component and tie it to the data that's coming from our API, all through using state and map. Some fun stuff coming down the pipeline, but gonna pause there. Tomorrow we'll start numbering all of this out as just a review to get us back into this project of where we're at, how where we left off last night. But I will leave the last 5 minutes to any questions you guys may have. Apparently I can't speak at 8:24 at night. Any questions you may have, feel free to throw them out now. Otherwise, have an awesome evening, and I will see you guys bushy-eyed and bright-tailed, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. That's what I was going for at 5:30 tomorrow. It was a long day. There was a lot of bugs. I just, what do you want from me? Let's call for questions.